Okay, hold on. Let me go live first, and then we'll play around with
Yeah, that's all right. I can multitask if you go live first and then yeah.
that. Okay. All right. Let me see if I just do it from my phone real quick. That could be easier. Share, copy link, and almost there. For the Sixers. Perfect. And then paste the link, post. That should be better.
Yes.
Awesome. Perfect. Perfect. All right. You ready to get started?
Yeah, man.
All right. So first, just talk to me about the most recent Tyrese Maxey news, and that now he's sick, and kind of the sickness that's been going around the team. I believe Tobias had it and Paul Reed had it. Maybe there's other people too. So he was also at an event yesterday. So
Right.
just tell me a little bit like what you think might be going on.
Well, I'm worried a little bit about Josh for us, who was at that event yesterday and wrote a very great article about being at the event yesterday. But yeah, so it's crazy because they have been dealing with various illnesses since like November. I'm not even exaggerating with that. I know Jaden Springer has had two different illnesses that caused him to miss time. Joel Embiid had it at one point. He missed time with an illness. Marcus Morris had it at one point. Pat Bev had it at one point. Anthony Melton. I think you know what, and Tyrese had another illness too. If you remember when they played that Celtics hospital game when they almost won, Tyrese had an illness then and missed that game. So it's like multiple illnesses that have just been like I don't know if the Sixers just like don't have enough Purell on hand or if guys aren't washing their hands. Like it's insane that it feels like they're getting hit more than any team in the NBA. Maybe it just feels that way because we're around it, but it feels that way to me. I've had one little cold. I'm grateful that that's all I've had while being around the team. But yeah, now Maxi listed as questionable. I know Paul Reed. The last Nick Nurse has said the last two games he has not been 100%, and he's played anyway. He's kind of played through it. When we talked to Tobias Harris the other night, he said that he was feeling it during the West Coast trip, didn't play until that Portland game. He was not, you could tell he wasn't right in that Portland game. He didn't look right all night. And then Utah, he was great. He played really well in that game. It was overshadowed because Maxi went nuclear, but he was really good in that game. Had 28 points, had some timely stops, timely baskets. He said that after that game, he like the level of sweat he produced after that game was like alarming. Like he could tell he wasn't right yet. And then I'm sure the altitude and then a plane ride across the country, none of that helped when he arrived back. Missed the Nets game, which was a disaster. And then, the other night you could tell he was better than he was in Portland, but he still wasn't himself. So I guess all of that to say, this team desperately needs the All Star break to happen. Between illnesses, between injuries, they need a break. Like they need guys to just get healthy because now it's to a point where tonight potentially the only starter you could have in the lineup might be Tobias Harris, and that might be it. And if Maxi does play, he's clearly not going to be 100%. So yeah, they just need to survive until the All Star break, until guys can get some rest and heal up and recover from these sicknesses because it's out of hand right now.
Yeah, I mean, you have to imagine that when after playing in Denver and guys were playing 40 minutes, you know, the recovery period is probably going to be that much more impactful when you're that sick. You probably laying in bed is way more appealing than going out and practicing and sweating again. So, speaking of
And plane
Max,
rides.
yeah, the plane rides are
Multiple plane rides. I mean, that's really rough when you're talking about sicknesses and being in enclosed spaces. I mean, it's impossible to avoid.
yeah. And do you think Maxi will be like ready? Do you think they're gonna try to play him through this illness, or do you think he'll be ready for the All Star game like fully healthy?
I mean, it's the All Star game. You still have it's what the 16th is the All Star weekend that kicks off, so you still have a solid week and a half. That Sunday is when it is the game itself. So I have to imagine he'll be fine by then. Knowing I would say this, knowing Tyrese Maxey, I would not be surprised if he tries to play tonight. Whether that's a good idea or not, I'm not so sure. He is 23 years old though. Once upon a time I was 23 and I felt like I could play, do different things and feel different than perhaps someone like a Marcus Morris, could. In his mid 30s. So I think he's going to do everything in his power. I know he wasn't at shoot around. All the reporters that were at shoot around had mentioned that he wasn't even there today. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure today's going to be all about rest and recovery for him and hoping, putting some fluids in him and hoping he can be ready to go. And I'm sure he's going to do everything he can. They have a back to back this weekend, which is not, it's against, opponents normally you would say they should beat, but depending on who's actually available and who plays and what happens at the trade deadline, they have Atlanta at home Friday in DC on Saturday, two winnable games, but they need to have some players available to do that. So I would, this is pure conjecture. I mean, if Maxi can't go tonight, I would imagine he doesn't miss both of those games, but yeah, we're just gonna have to wait and see.
And I feel like it makes sense why. I mean, he's sick, right? But if he had like a strain muscle or anything, like the workload has increased now that Joel's out. He gets named to the
He does
All.
have a he does have a bad ankle right now. That's still an issue. He said if he can play, he's fine, but yeah, like that's something I mean, that's still there too. So who knows how healthy that ankle is?
Yeah. Do you think? So he had 51 against Utah, and then 23, and then 15 against Brooklyn and Dallas. The last two games. We're seeing kind of the effect of defenses focusing in on him as opposed to him splitting the focus between himself and Joel. Do you think the ankle, kind of this stretch, the workload is kind of getting to him, and that's why we're seeing the decline in like production, or do you think he will probably figure it out in due time? It kind of has to, right?
Right. Yeah. No, I think it's fair that I mean, he even kind of admitted it, and I think according like what Nick Nurse said is that he felt like the team, not just Tyrese, the team did not handle, because Dallas is pretty aggressive in blitzing him on every single pick and roll. And he said that Nick Nurse, they talked about strategies and ways to combat that, and that they just didn't execute those as a team. I think personnel, it is an issue. Look, I like Paul Reed. I think Paul Reed's a pretty good player, but you're now asking him to be a starting center, and that's a lot to ask of him. And then Mo Bamba is in and out of the lineup. He's been inconsistent, and so you know, I think they need another center. And I think I'm pretty sure that they're going to try everything they can to get another center. And I think that's part of the reason. I think they wanted to before Joel Embiid got hurt. I think Joel Embiid getting hurt just adds to that urgency for them to try to stay afloat. And they're going to need, whether that's a more traditional big that is going to set harder screens and roll harder to the rim. And maybe that perhaps frees Maxi up a little bit more, or if it's a more of a pick and pop guy who, again, when the team's blitz and that guy has the ball, top of the key, that's an easy open shot, or a good passing big where Tyrese hits them on that short roll and they find guys in the corners, they find cutters. So yeah, I think definitely part of it is the team, Tyrese included, has to be better with just handling it and doing it. But then yeah, I think for sure, like, he's 23, he's never dealt with this before. He's even said that, like, he's never dealt with being kind of getting this much attention, because even when he was playing at Kentucky, like, there were other guys on that team that you had to worry about, so teams couldn't do that to him. They couldn't aggressively blitz him or do anything like that because they had other weapons to worry about. And right now, it's, speaking frankly, it's with Joel Embiid out of the lineup, teams don't fear anybody else. Now, Tobias Harris can make them pay at times for sure for doing that, but he also has moments in games where he can't do that, where he seems to kind of fade into the background. And again, he's been dealing with an illness too, so he was not particularly good the other night. So yeah, I mean, I think most teams the strategy is just going to be rightfully so, we are not going to let Tyrese Maxey beat us. We are going to force, especially after he drops 51 points on national TV against the Utah Jazz. The strategy is we are not going to let this guy beat us. We are going to force the four other guys on the court to do so. And until they do, that's going to keep being the strategy. So, and again, at the deadline, does a more effective 3-point shooter that can make teams pay? Does that help? Another player that can create off the dribble to help ease Maxey's workload in that department. Maybe that helps. So yeah, I think it's a combination of the things you mentioned as far as Tyrese needs to, he probably is a little bit worn down. I'm sure that's a part of it. Part of it is he and the team needs to handle a little better. And then third, I think is some just personnel stuff where they're gonna have to do some things at the deadline. And plus, I think getting DeAnthony Melton and Nicholas Batum would really help in that regard because both of those guys are such good shooters. And then also with Batum, he's such a good connective piece that can really help. Again, you talk about a guy in the short roll that can really help, navigate things and is such a good connective passer. So I think all of those are pretty big factors when you're talking about, what's been going on with Tyrese Maxey and what needs to happen going forward.
Yeah, so I mean, I couldn't agree more, and I feel like a lot of the players you just listed are kind of their equivalencies to the people that have been reported, and I have a list of some of the names. So unless we get breaking news as we're doing this, why don't you just kind of rank these names and that in the priority you think Daryl should go after him? So I have 5 guys here. I have Buddy Hield, DeJounte Murray, Bojan Bogdanovic, Andre Drummond, and Kelly Olynyk. So Kelly and Andre were reported by Woj the other day to be centers that could either pick and pop or hard pick and roll, like you just said, that I think would be good additions. Or Kelly, pick and pop, same kind of deal. And then you have Bojan, who's a shooter, and and Buddy Hield, who obviously is a shooter. And then DeJounte's kind of that, could be a little bit of a higher price, but could help keep the Sixers afloat heading into the playoffs. So rank who you think would be the best additions. If I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but
Yeah, no, it's cool. It's all good. Yeah, I mean, so I would say with DeJounte, it's tough because of the price tag. Like, I don't know. Like, Atlanta is in a spot where, yeah, it would probably benefit them to trade him and get something back for him and get off that money. But at the same time, they really have no pressure to do so. Like, if they can simply, and they've actually been playing, he's been playing pretty well, and the team's been playing pretty well recently. So they could just keep him. So they have that leverage that he's under contract. He's under a very, I think one of the appealing things when with Sixers fans talking about him is that contract is very appealing for a guy who could be like your third or fourth best player to be in that 20 million range. It's a pretty good contract, especially in the new CBA and everything going on. Like, so I think that's part of the appeal there, and that's part of the reason why the Hawks might just hold on to him if they don't get the deal they like. Now, if you can get him for, I don't know, a first round pick plus, like, you don't want to trade DeAnthony Melton, but if that's like what it could take and then salary filler after that, yeah, I mean, that's a guy I would definitely be interested in. If it's 2 first round picks, I might be out on that only because you do want to, you do kind of want to save some of your ammo for the off season. And Brian Toporek, who does such an awesome job for us, he recently wrote about the whole draft pick landscape of what they have after the James Harden trade, and I would strongly advise anyone who's interested to read that. But essentially, because of the Stepien rule and the way teams, they can't have consecutive years trading away first round picks, it's a whole big thing. But with that, so it boils down to right now they can trade 3 first round picks. In the offseason on draft night, that number goes up to 5 because they can then on draft night trade the 2024 pick and then also trade the pick 7 years in advance of 2031 one. So if a star becomes available, having for 5 first-round picks as a starting point offer is pretty darn good. Um, but at the same time, I know Jake Fisher had mentioned, the Sixers potentially, Daryl Morey potentially looking to add more first-round picks in a different way. Whether that's, the Clippers pick swap of 2029. Maybe you look towards a team like the Thunder or the Pelicans who have a lot of first-round picks that they're probably not going to be able to use. So maybe you go to them to look for, you moving that pick swap for a first-round pick or consolidate. Now the Sixers, I think, have, I can't remember this off the top of my head. It's something like 5 second-round picks to trade or 7 in the offseason, consolidating some of those second-round picks to get a first-rounder from someone. So it's things like that. Because then there's other things with non-guaranteed contracts, and now I'm getting way too into the weeds on all of the draft pick minutia. But
Nah,
all of that to say, if the price is right, I would put DeJounte Murray number 1 because I think he can help you stay afloat now. And I actually think he would be a decent fit because this year he is taking and making more threes than he ever has. And if you look over his career, each of the last, I think, 4 seasons, his attempts and his percentages have gone up. So if that trajectory keeps going, that's a player you want to. He's only 26 too. Like, this is a young guy, so like he's just entering his prime as a player. So if the price is right, I would be highly interested. But then when you're looking at the rest, I'd probably put Olynyk number 2 because you need a center. Flat out, you just need a center who can fill minutes right now. A veteran guy that can fill minutes with Embiid being out. And I like the idea of the pick and pop guy. And what I also like about Olynyk is when Joel comes back, you could potentially play Olynyk as a 4. Certain matchups that could work out. He's a floor spacer. He's again a good passer. He's had experience playing with a guy like Bam Adebayo in Miami, where he's played with bigs. He's played, right now even, he's got experience playing with Walker Kessler, so in some lineups with Utah. So he's a guy that, yes, a very good filler now and a good backup when Embiid goes back, but he could also potentially play with Embiid. And he's the kind of guy that when he's on your team, you love him. When he's not, you hate him. And there's no, like, that's a good guy to have in the playoffs. Just a feisty instigator type player. So I think for all those reasons, I'd probably put him at number 2. Again, the cost would matter if you're giving up a first round pick. I think I'm probably out on Kelly Olynyk. Multiple seconds and a player. Yeah, we can talk. And then beyond that, let's see. It's tough after that because then
You've got
I guess I'll go like
Boyan.
this.
Yeah, you got
Yeah.
Boyan, Buddy, and Andre Drummond.
So given if let's say if Olenix 2, that puts me at a lower priority for the center. So that's the only reason I would have Drummond probably last in this regard. And I think Andre Drummond would be an excellent fit. You saw last night what he did against Rudy Gobert and the Timberwolves. They pull off that win, big upset win. He's gonna protect the rim. He's gonna block shots. He's gonna create turnovers. He's gonna screen and roll hard. An underrated passer that I think a lot of us learned in his time in Philadelphia. So again, a guy who on that short roll could help you out finding the corners, finding cutters. So yeah, I mean, I really like the idea of him in that regard. The difference between him and Olynyk is he would be you're not going to play him with Joel Embiid. He's going to be a pure backup center. And then in certain matchups, he's not a guy that moves his feet particularly well. Against a more mobile center, he's going to struggle. So that's why I would lean Olynyk, but I think Drummond would be a fine addition to give you starter minutes while Embiid is out, and then as a backup player in certain matchups in the postseason, and in the matchup I talked about where it's a more mobile guy, you'd probably more likely use someone like Paul Reed. And then so let's say Drummond is 5. Man, it's tough between Hield and Boyan because I think I'd actually put Boyan slightly ahead of Buddy for a couple reasons. So Bojan hasn't played a real basketball game in a long time. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he's been on the Pistons for a while now, and he hasn't played a competitive game. And he is older. I mean, he's 30. I think he's 35 now. So, but what I like about him more than I like about Buddy, there's a couple things. I think he's got a little bit more craftiness off the bounce than Buddy. He can, he can attack a closeout. He can actually he's pretty good at drawing fouls and getting to the free throw line. Um, and I just think he's a little more creative off the bounce. So I would like that aspect. And I'll also say too, so like, if you go back and watch him with the Jazz, defensively he held up. Like look, he's not an all defensive team type player. That's like he's not a good defender, I would say, but he's held up in against tough players in tough playoff matchups. For the Jazz in that Western Conference with a lot of good wings. So it's been a while since he's been asked to do that. He's now 35 years old, so I don't know what that would look like. But between him and Buddy Hield, I would probably trust him a little bit more. With all that said, and then the last thing I would say too is contract wise. So Buddy's a free agent. Bojan is under contract, but it's only guaranteed for like 2 million. So that flexibility might be nice to have, especially if you have to dip into your first round pick pool to get one of those guys.
Mm-hmm.
Having a player where you could either move him in the offseason again, on that, or with that partial guarantee, you can move him potentially again. Or if a free agent will, pick a guy, I don't know what that would look like now, but if a free agent happens to be available and you need that cap space, you simply cut him, you pay him the 2 million, and you take the cap hit, and you still have that flexibility. So I kind of like that. Or again, you could just keep him, and then he's under contract, and maybe he helps your team again next year. So for those reasons, I would put Bojan ahead, but I will say I really like the idea of Buddy Hield too, because I think Buddy as a movement shooter, just that gravity and what that could create for Joel Embiid and for Tyrese Maxey, I love. I think he's improved as a guy who can play off the dribble a little bit, and I think he's improved as a defender a little bit. Now, it's not a guy I'm asking to do a lot of those things. Like I'm not putting him on a top perimeter player, obviously defensively. I'm not asking him to run my offense, but I think he's improved in those areas a little bit where he could be playoff viable. I'm not putting him in the starting lineup probably. I'm probably not playing him 30 minutes, but I think I think he's a more playoff viable player than he was, say, 2 or 3 years ago. So that's probably where I would rank those guys, but I'm intrigued by all five of those players. I think all five of them could help in different ways. And I would end on this. Like I know Brian Windhorst said, he might, they could potentially make 1 to 3 trades before Joel Embiid got hurt. That's, I was hearing ball handler. They're gonna go for a ball handler. They're gonna go for a potential 3-and-D wing or maybe more of a shooter, and they're gonna go after a big. So I don't think those priorities have changed. I think that those are the same exact players they're looking for. Now maybe that's you go get a Buddy Hield, you go get a Kelly Olynyk, and then Kyle Lowry is a guy you get in a buyout market as your ball handler. So I don't know what it looks like, but I would be surprised if this team doesn't have a ball handler, a new ball handler, a new wing, and a new big by Thursday.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if you could somehow pull off 3 trades and get 3 considerably better rotation pieces than they have now, and at least
Oh, I think you're out.
one sec.
There it is.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, perfect. So instead of maybe doing 3 trades, you talked about their 5 first-round picks that might open up later, or will open up later. But out of the big fish, right? I'm gonna give you 3 names, and I want you to pick 2 that you would like, because I feel like one of them's a little bit of an easy one. So between Laurie Markkinen, DeMar DeRozan, and then Klay Thompson, 3 guys who have been reported. Markkinen, obviously, with Danny Ainge, might be a little bit of a heftier price, but DeRozan, Klay Thompson, kind of a similar positional player, but different skill set. Who do you think, out of those kind of big names, the Sixers are more likely to go out and get?
So I just think Laurie. A couple of things with Laurie. I think one, I don't. There's a lot of really good Jazz beat writers that I follow, and one of them being Sarah Todd, who used to be a Sixers beat writer for the Inquirer at one point. Um, I think if you ask any of them, they would be stunned if he gets moved for anything. The Utah Jazz really like him. I think some of that trade buzz that was out there was more if you want to give us a Godfather offer for Laurie Markin and we will take it,
Yeah.
but we're not actively trying to trade him. So like, and I don't think the Sixers certainly they don't have it now. And I don't think they'd have it even with those 5 first-round picks in the offseason. I don't think they'd have it then to even enter a conversation for Laurie Markkinen. So that's where I'm at. Like, listen, he's terrific. He would be a sensational fit here, as another creator, another guy who can shoot, and just another big tall body out there. I think he'd be an absolutely outstanding fit, but I don't see a realistic path at all to them even entering that conversation. And again, I think ultimately he winds up playing for the Utah Jazz for a very long time. Just my opinion. We'll see what happens there. Maybe a team does come in. A team like Oklahoma City does offer that Godfather offer and they get Markin in at some point, maybe. But I think that's more realistic than the team like the Sixers potentially being in on that. And then the other, let's see. So then we have Clay and DeMar DeRozan. So it's tricky. If we're talking the deadline, I think DeMar makes more sense now because of the contract. Um, I'll say that I just from people I've spoken to, they've really shown little to no interest in DeMar DeRozan. Whether it's now or in the past, but the reason I would say him over Clay now is just it's really financial. I mean, Clay makes $40 million. That's really tough to match unless you're moving Tobias Harris. And if you're moving Tobias Harris or Clay Thompson, I don't think that I don't know. I'm not sure how much better that makes you. Now, there's stuff about Clay. If I'm just talking about a fit, though, if we're throwing contracts and all that out the window,
Hmm.
Clay's the better fit because he can shoot. Because they need an elite shooter. So you talk about guys like Bojan and Buddy. Clay is the better version of those guys. Because he is a better defender and he's just a better overall defender or a better overall player than those two guys. Um, I think what's interesting, and Clay has struggled, quite frankly, over the last couple weeks. He actually had so it's funny. He started the season in a rough slump. Then for like 30 games, Clay was actually really good. If you go back and look at the numbers, he was taking like 10 threes a game and hitting over 40%. Like he's never going to be the Clay he was, but that's pretty darn good production. And then recently he's really struggled. So like, let's say the offseason, right? Let, let's say they strike out and it's who knows what's going to happen, who knows what players become available in trades and all that, but let's say they strike out on their big fish targets, like they don't get Paul George, they don't get LeBron James or whomever. There's no guy, there's no player that's pissed off about a coach getting fired or a playoff flame out to trade for. Signing Klay Thompson to a non-max deal with that cap space, I think is it's not an unattractive option. He's a guy that, again, I think that gravity as an off ball mover really could open up a lot of things. Him and Joel Embiid in a DHO. I mean, that's as deadly as it gets. So, um, I don't think any of those guys that were mentioning, those three, is realistic for the Sixers now. Um, Out of those three, I'd say the most realistic in the offseason is probably Clay. I think when you're talking about fit and you're talking about the fact that he's not going to demand a max contract just because no other team's going to be able to give him that. And if you're Clay and you want the opportunity to help a team still make a good bit of money, but also still contend and compete for another ring, the Sixers kind of there's a bridge to gap there. I think that could maybe possibly make sense.
And then speaking of the off season, like who do you think besides maybe Paul George and LeBron are other big names? I'm not 100% sure of the free agents to be, but
There's you kind of name them. I mean, really, there's just
that's what
really
it feels like.
and possibly Siakam. If but it seems really likely that he's going to go back to the Pacers and get that supermax deal. Um, but if we're talking about pure free agency, unless Paul George or LeBron are out there, there's probably not much for you unless you're talking about a non-max guy that you maybe look into again, like a Klay Thompson. But the one thing I think people are kind of losing sight of, and again, Brian wrote a really great piece about it for Liberty Ballers, is that it's not just about having that cap space for free agency. It's about having that cap space if a player becomes available via trade. And now you're armed again with 5 first-round picks, I think 7 second-round picks, and cap space.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't even need to trade you don't even need to trade a player to another team in order to bring a star back if you have 50 something million in cap space. So and that's why too, like so let's say DeJounte Murray stays with the Hawks and you want to revisit that. You can revisit that in the offseason. But like I can't. You just never know, right? Like you just and I think the flexibility is important because of that reason. Because between now and July, or really, I guess between June, the draft, you don't know what player will have a spat with a coach or a GM. You don't know which team will flame out in epic fashion in the playoffs and a guy demands a trade. So you just don't know these things. And so because of that, that's why that flexibility is huge. To just be able to have that where you will be in a position where if a player does ask out, again, you can pay them. You have the assets to satisfy the trading team. And you're offering the opportunity for that player to play on a contender with Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. It's just, they are just in a very unique spot if they keep that flexibility open.
100%. I feel like I personally lean more towards going for that big cap hitter right now, especially if Paul George and LeBron are the only 2 players available. I feel like even DeJounte would. I mean, Paul George is the perfect fit. I mean, I feel like that's
he really would be, yeah,
of a given. But I don't know. I feel like going after DeJounte wouldn't be too bad. Or I feel like maybe pulling off 2 trades is like my gut feeling is what's telling me. Because I feel like Morey realizes the point where he's at, where if Embiid comes back and they're going to probably force him to come back for the playoffs, or himself is going to force himself to come back for the playoffs, I feel like just having that best team around him would be the best case scenario. But we talk about all the players we would be getting in. We have to talk about the players we would be sending out. I know Robert Covington and Marcus Morris Sr. are very likely because of their contracts being like pretty reasonable to match. But who do you think, including them, would be most likely to be sent out for a trade? And please tell me it's not Furkan, because I personally need him here for our championship run. So
yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that would be, he would be Furkan would be on the list. Because listen, it's similar to the reasons you talked about with Marcus Morris and Covington. It's that he makes $5 million, and it's an expiring deal, so it's just a really nice, easy one to match, whatever player. And I think that's the flexibility that Morey has right now, is that you have Marcus Morris who's on the higher end at 17 million. You have Cove in the middle at 11 million. You have Furkan at 5 million. Then you have a guy like KJ Martin around 2 million. So like you have this variety of contracts that you can move, that you can kind of shape to fit whatever trade you see fit. And so like, I think the best way to look at it, when you look at like trading Furkan, potentially trading KJ Martin, potentially trading Rocco, is that, with Furkan and KJ Martin, you're getting playoff. The idea is you're swapping them for playoff viable rotation level players, which would be huge to do that, to have guys that are, your 14th and 15th man, to make them playoff, turn that into 2 playoff viable players. That's pretty big. I think with Cove, it's like, he can't stay healthy. And it's a damn shame, because I think he could help them in some regards, but especially now, like you could maybe even, if he were fully healthy, you could tinker with some him with some small ball 5 with Embiid out, like you could do some stuff, but now that's, it's off the table. And I think just swapping him for a healthy body would be good. And then, even with Marcus Morris is, he's dealing with plantar fasciitis. He's been in and out of the lineup too. So getting a healthy body for him would be big. So Yeah, I think if you're looking at guys who are most likely, I think those are the four guys. It's Marcus Morris, it's Robert Covington, it's Furkan Korkmaz, and it's KJ Martin. Those seem like the most four likely players because of contract, because of where they are as far as the rotation and their health. I think those are the guys that are most likely.
How would you assess D'Anthony Melton's and Nico Batum's recovery so far?
Troubling. Quite frankly, I mean, really, it's with D'Anthony, he dealt with the back issue last year. He says it's unrelated this one, but it's like it's your back. I don't know how it's unrelated. I don't know how you had like your back is your back. It's all connected. So certainly a concern. He came back for a little bit, it wasn't quite right, and so they sat him even longer. He was aiming. I think he told reporters he was aiming to come back on Monday against Dallas. Uh, maybe there's some caution there because you don't want him coming back and chasing around Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. And now tonight, you don't want him chasing around Steph Curry. So maybe there's something to that. Maybe then again, Friday night, he'll be chasing around Trae Young. So that's
Mm-hmm.
doesn't really get any easier. So yeah, so it's troubling. It quite frankly is because you see his value, right? Like recently, they're not taking threes, they're not making threes, and he's a guy who takes and makes a lot of them, and so that hurts. They're missing. He's not the greatest ball handler in the world, but compared to the guys that they have left, I mean, he would be an upgrade. He would be better. And then defensively, creating deflections, causing turnovers, getting out in the fast break. I mean, yeah, we make jokes about his finishing, and I get it. He makes jokes about his own finishing, and Tyrese Maxey, busts his chops more than anyone about it. But he's been a little better this year, and just creating those opportunities is big in and of itself. So I think he has demonstrated his value and how much they've missed him recently. So yeah, it's worrisome that he's still out, that it's a back issue again. And that we have really no idea when he's going to come back because they need him. Or if they don't need, if not him, they need a player that can bring what he brings. So it's a concern. And then same with Nico Batum because he's been in it. It's the same hamstring. He's 36. He just turned 36 or just turned 35. I can't remember which. Either way, uh as an old person, it's not as a fellow old person, it is not fun dealing with hamstring issues. And I don't have to play in NBA games, and he has to, and not only like they're asking him to do a lot when he does play. He's guarding, routinely guarding the other team's best perimeter player. It's a lot to ask of him at his age and with that hamstring. So I kind of sense though too, Drew, like when he first went out with the hamstring issue, then he missed a bunch of games, then he came back. I felt like they were being really careful with him then, like they were really limiting his minutes. So if I had to like between him and Melton, I'm more concerned about Melton because Melton is young and they're sitting him out like this. Whereas Batum, I get wanting like you need him for the playoffs. Like you need a guy like him for the playoffs. You need that defensive versatility. You need him as a connective passer, as an entry passer for Joel Embiid.
Yeah.
So I get more him taking a way more cautious approach with him. Um, so that may be the case, but it still falls into the troubling category, just slightly less than my how I feel about the Anthony Melton right now.
100%. I couldn't have said it any better. I feel like both of them are extremely important. Um, Batum's entry passing is like night and day compared to what it was last year. I mean, if we just had him for the playoffs last year, who knows what could have happened. But speaking of last year, we have a new coach. How would you assess Nick Nurse so far through the regular season compared to Doc, and maybe how the team responds to him?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's a pretty big difference between Doc Rivers and Nick Nurse. The biggest thing being the adjustments that Nick Nurse makes, the chances he takes, the things he's willing to do, the things he's willing to try schematically, defensively, and you even saw it again the other night against Dallas. Like they lost that game because they couldn't score. They didn't lose that game because of their defense. They held Luka and Kyrie Irving in check for most of the night. Kyrie had that spurt in the third quarter where he was kind of unguardable, but there's really nothing much he could have done. I mean, he was just on one, and sometimes he's a great player, does great things. You tip your cap, you move on. But that kind of thing where He's not going to be afraid to experiment and do different things defensively. That's in stark contrast to Doc Rivers, and kind of the rigidity we saw with him throughout his time here. And I would say, though, if we're looking at concerns, and the concern wasn't really quelled when Doc Rivers was here because he did similar things, is Nick Nurse plays guys a lot of minutes. He plays and he'll tell you, he plays his best players the most minutes, which makes sense. It's logical, but you're kind of seeing maybe some of that creep up here with so many injuries. With Joel, playing a pretty good minute workload and playing really hard on both ends. I know Joel to his, really took pride in that he didn't take possessions off this year, that he's playing hard on both ends. And unfortunately, that might have been, it might have been what kind of caught up to him so early in the season for that to happen. We already mentioned Tyrese Maxey battling that ankle injury and playing through it. And, how much this could be wearing on him. Again, Nicholas Batum taking on a big role at in his mid-30s. And so that's my concern with Nick Nurse. Is like I think he X's and O's, in-game adjustments. He's gonna match up, with any coach in the NBA. Really, I truly believe that. If they play the Heat, him and Eric Spoelstra will be an epic coaching matchup, which you don't get too many of those in the NBA. But any other coach in the East, I mean, him versus Doc Rivers, I'm taking Nick Nurse all day. Him versus Joe Mazzulla, I'm taking Nick Nurse. Like, go up and down the line, I'm taking him over probably any coach in the East that isn't Eric Spoelstra. He's that good of a coach in my mind. So, I think you're seeing the noticeable difference he's making. When you talk about how players respond to him, I think he has empowered guys, and I think guys have responded to that. Especially offensively, like, he's Pat Bev has talked about it extensively, how he's really told them, like, hey, like, if you have an open shot, you need to take it. Like, you are a good offensive basketball player. You need to do that. And I think he's done that with all the guys. I think he's empowered everyone to kind of, if they have the ability to do something, to do it, but also, like, play within themselves. So yeah, I think the players have responded to him in a big way. I know, Joel's enjoyed playing for him. I know Tyrese Maxey's enjoyed playing for him. You go back to the beginning of the season where Nick Nurse was telling us and are really harping on it, like, Tyrese Maxey, I need you to take 20 shots a game. He would say it to us every single availability. He would say, I need Tyrese to take 20 shots a game. That's the number. So imagine that as a player, you're Tyrese Maxey at the time, 22 years old, and you have your head coach saying, I need you to take 20 shots a game. Like, just that, I think stuff like that goes a long way with guys in within the locker room. And so I think that empowerment has gone a long way.
Awesome. Feel like I could do one last question. Do we know the reason why Joel's expected time missed went from 4 weeks when it was first reported to now yesterday? It came out that it's going to be closer to 6 weeks, which pushes him a little bit further back, but shortens that time for the ramp up. So just talk to me a little bit about what your thoughts on how the Sixers medical staff has kind of handled Joel ever since the Denver game, because that's kind of been the topic of discussion, but more specifically the 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think anyone who watched that Golden State game, and I wrote about it, we all, a bunch of us wrote about it. If you watch that, I mean, it was quite frankly hard to watch. It was hard to watch Joel Embiid play basketball that night. It looked like he never should have been out there. Certainly feels like he shouldn't have been out there with 4 minutes left in a game they were losing by 12, in a game that it never really felt like they were in for most of the night. It just seemed like he shouldn't have been out there. So I'll say that's on everyone to me. Like, that's not on just I don't know where the buck stops, but I can tell you that's on the medical staff, that's on Joel Embiid, that's on Nick Nurse, that's on the front office, that's on everyone. For that to have gone down the way it did, that should have never happened. So I'll start there. So with the timeline thing, I think it's just tricky because, and listen, the most of the and I'm not going to quote my wife, because she would kill me if I did that. But she is a certified athletic trainer, and so she has, 6 years ago, or whatever, 8 years ago when we started dating, and I asked her about injuries. I think she thought it was cute. 8 years later, I think she's very annoyed by it and hates it. And she'll
The
tell
same
you,
injuries.
yeah, well, that, yeah. But she'll tell you too, like a couple things. One, doctors hate timelines. Like they hate giving timelines for a lot of reasons. Because there are so many variables with the player, with the history, with especially when you're talking about a meniscus, because a meniscus has so many variables about where exactly it tore, how big is the tear, what was the procedure, where like it's there's what's the blood like where it happens could affect the blood flow. I'm sure he's going to get like those the injections, the plasma injections to help support the blood flow and promote healing. Like there are so many different factors that are all incorporated in this. So I think that's where the wide range of kind of timelines of flexibility goes. Now, I think when they say reevaluate in 4 to 6 weeks, because I think, or no, sorry, reevaluate in 4 weeks was officially what the team said, and I think it's that because if it's the I can't even pronounce it the basically the snip the where they snip the part of the meniscus, um, on the super optimistic end of that is 4 to 6 weeks. So I think that's why they do the 4 weeks to say, like, let's reassess. I strongly, strongly doubt, and this is not inside information. This is just, me talking. I strongly doubt he's back in 4 weeks. I think the 6 weeks is the safer, more conservative approach. Um, but look, if he's back in 6 weeks, that gives him a pretty good amount of like I think it gives him like what like 3 weeks of ramp up time, and so that's
Mm-hmm.
a pretty solid amount of regular season games to get in game shape, make sure he's okay, make sure he can play on it, and make sure it's viable to do so in the playoffs. 8 weeks makes it tougher, but not impossible. I think he would get like a handful of games still at 8 weeks. So yeah, I mean, I just think with the timeline thing, I think it's just so difficult because there are so many variables when you're talking about Joel Embiid himself and the injury history he's had, when you're talking about the fact that he's 7 feet tall and 280 pounds something, who knows how much that is. Um, when you factor all of those things in, I think that just muddies it and it just creates more variables. So I don't think it's anything. And look, I think the Sixers medical staff and I think the Sixers in general deserve plenty of criticism for the way a lot of stuff has been handled. But I don't think there's anything deceptive or anything like that going on with that. I think it's just genuinely they're going to look at it in 4 weeks, see where it is, and then from there, maybe you get a better inclination of okay, in 2 more weeks, it seems realistic, or nah, you know what, he needs 4 more weeks. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
think in 4 weeks the picture will just be a little bit clearer. So I think that's why you got that statement from the team.
Yeah, I think it makes 100% sense. Like we see, I mean, I feel like especially we saw it a lot with the Phillies too, where like Bryce and everyone there's like this date, and even Joel in the past where you get reevaluated. Then it could just be another 2, 3 weeks, but I feel like that's all I've got. If there's any other notes, I mean, we did just get a Woj bomb from uh,
Oh,
Adrian Woj, but
my
it's
goodness.
the Utah Jazz are trading Simone
Oh,
Fontecchio to the Detroit Pistons for a 2024 second round pick. Not
what
the
a
type of slap,
blockbuster.
not the type of slap we were expecting, but at least,
Floodgates. Let's open the
yeah,
floodgates.
maybe it's like the Royce O'Neal trade from a couple years ago. But um, yeah, thank you for stopping on.
Of
Make sure
course.
everyone likes and subscribes the YouTube channel. But we are going to head out. I'm going to let you get back to writing it up and talking to people and seeing what else is going on. And maybe we will reconvene after the deadline if anything happens. So
That sounds like a fantastic idea, my friend.
awesome. Awesome. All right. I just ended the stream.